Hey everyone, we're House of Dodge. We're here today with Duane, President of WDBF. This is hopefully the first of a series of interviews we do. So Duane, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well, thank you. And thanks for having me, I appreciate that.
Yeah, no, wonderful person to have on, especially for our first one. I think a lot of people will be interested in what you have to say. Are you happy if we just crack straight into the questions?
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. So the first thing, I think it'd be nice to sort of know your story so far. So how does Duane become the president of World Dodgeball?
Well, it's kind of funny. Back in, I think it was 2006, my wife was working for an ad agency at this point in time, and they were putting together a dodgeball team in recreational dodgeball in a local league in the city. And she asked me to play. And I played, and it was a lot of fun, so much so that I wanted to pull my own team in. So we put a team in of friends together back in 2006, and we've been playing together ever since as a team. In terms of kind of, progressing in like the governance area, I've kind of worked in governance sports for a while. I spent 8 years as the vice president of Athletics Alberta here in Edmonton, and I had spent some time on the board in Ontario with the Special Olympics. And so I've always kind of been interested in sports governance. And, a few years into playing dodgeball, seeing how exciting and fun it was and learning that there were people playing not only, in other parts of the country, but all over the world. But yet in Canada, there was not really a formal standardized approach to dodgeball. A few of us got the idea that we needed to change that and just to formalize it. And then once you kind of get into the stream of governance and you see what's happening in other areas and you get more interested in it. And finally, I guess with us hosting the World Championships back in 2017, there was an opportunity to move into the president role for WDBF. I was really happy to do that because I kind of had some thoughts on where the organization needed to go. And that's kind of how I got involved.
Oh, cool. So it was quite a natural progression then.
Yes, yeah. It wasn't like I was working in governance in another sport and made the jump. I started as legitimately loving to play dodgeball, and then kind of as that moved on and progressed, there were opportunities, and I kind of was up for them whenever they came along in that respect.
Okay, cool, awesome. So I guess that's the story of how you became president. But since you've become president, what would you say has changed?
The size, membership size. When I became president in 2017, there were 7 or 8 countries that were regularly coming to Worlds, and excuse me, and our kind of at that point in time, that's all we were really doing. Where we were doing World Championships and we were doing summits where we would exchange ideas and thoughts. Since then, we've gone from 7 or 8 members to 80 members at this point in time in the WDBF. And in all fairness, of those 80 members, a lot of them are they're just starting, they're just learning. But I would say there's a good 40 to 45 members that are countries that are playing dodgeball. They've got programs, they're in schools. Excuse me. And so the size has just been the biggest change. There's so many more countries wanting to be a part of this and trying to push the direction on where we're going. So it's that's kind of changed everything, really.
Wow, that's cool. Yeah. Right. So I guess the natural question now is, where do you think we're heading? So we've obviously had a lot of change in the size of dodgeball. What do you think? Where do you think? Sorry, we're heading.
Well, I think it's a couple of things. One is the current structure is not sustainable. We're a volunteer organization. Everybody's volunteer. Whenever we do a World Championships or a big event, it's usually the host country that bears a lot of the expense for that. Neither of those things are sustainable. We need to be able to. I had a wonderful meeting with Céline Ziguil from FIFA last week, and she made a comment about how we seem to be a victim of our own success. And it's a perfect way to put it. We've grown. We've have this relationship with Europe now from the last couple of years, and that's all wonderful. But now, how do we manage this growth, right? The members, they want things. We need to be better at providing things around officiating, coaching, long-term strategy, partnership development. And or a small volunteer organization, it's difficult to do. So one of our focuses has to be on getting partnerships in the mix, being able to portray the sport as something that is interesting and valuable to potential partners. So that's one thing. I think the second thing is, elephant in the room. You've still got the World Dodgeball Association out there doing their thing too, and I think that it's been made very clear to us from the powers that be that we need to figure out a way to come together, work beside each other. There's a lot of different ways that can look, but there needs to be a bit more stability in international governance, and that's where we've been putting a lot of our focus lately.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I guess it makes sense instead of having lots of organizations working in different directions to get us all sort of on one page, fighting for the same cause. Yeah. Right. So would you say that's probably the biggest obstacle facing us as we grow?
I think it is. As we were kind of saying, we've been part of the Tefisa World Games this month. If the event would have been held live under better conditions, we would have been there. Having a tournament in dodgeball. We've been invited to participate in a tournament with the CSIT World Sport Games in October. There are other games like the Gay Games in 2022, the corporate games. There are other organizations where we've been invited to play, which is wonderful and it's great for the sport. But when you look at like the Commonwealth Games or the Pan Am Games or the FISU, in these kinds of organizations, they are looking for one body, one stable connection. And until we get that sorted out, it's going to limit our ability to be a part of those kinds of events going forward.
Okay, cool. Yeah, that all makes sense to me. Right, so moving on to the next question. As a dodgeball player, sort of getting the boards and everything all together, I feel like that's maybe not something I can impact on. So what are there things that dodgeball players on a lower level can sort of do to help the growth of the sport?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's two main things that they can do. One is they can help their local clubs and their local national federations with volunteer efforts. With the exception of British Dodgeball, and there may be a couple of other members, most national federations operate strictly on a volunteer basis. So those federations rely on the good graces of their members and their players to kind of step up and help. So if you're a dodgeball player in the Czech Republic or in Norway or in Bolivia, and you want to know how to help the sport, it's by helping your national federation stepping up and doing that. And it's also by just trying to get people out to play. Dodgeball in Edmonton in Canada has grown because of a lot of local rec leagues where people told friends at work about dodgeball and how much fun it was, and let's go out and play it every Wednesday night. Or there's a tournament coming up, and I've never played dodgeball before, but come and play and you'll find it's fun. So really, like, the biggest thing that players can do, volunteer for their national federations and get more people playing.
I think a few of our fans had a couple of questions. Do you mind if we run them past you?
Yeah, no, of course. Of course.
Okay, so Sergio Leon asks, what is your favorite dodgeball memory?
Yeah, I have a few. I would say kind of like as a player, I think probably my favorite memory was when we, in Edmonton, we clinched our ticket to the national championships, or Canadian national championships. And that was kind of, as a player, I've never been a great player. So for me to be able to do that was, was fun. That was great. That's probably one of my favorite memories. I think, but one of the ones that always stands out in my mind when I think about it is, back in 2016, for Dodgeball Canada, we hosted our first national championships in Toronto. And this was before I was the Canadian representative to the WDBF, but at that point in time, I hadn't taken any leadership role with the WDBF. And we had just like less than a year, had pulled together Dodgeball Canada as a national governing body. And so when we had our first national championships, we didn't have a lot of teams. I mean, we had maybe a dozen teams. We had maybe 100, 150 players. But I remember at the opening ceremony thinking like this was a goal and we did it. Like we kind of it was the first step towards
Yeah.
legitimizing the sport in Canada, right? Where we actually had a national championship, so we actually had a national sporting organization. And I think there was this sense of pride with the 4 or 5 people that I had worked with to bring this to bear, was just this like, okay, dodgeball now at least, it's a thing, it's a real thing
Yeah.
in Canada, and we can build off it. So that was a great memory.
Yeah, that sounds wicked. Sort of like the first step.
Yes, yeah, exactly.
Cool. The next question is from Karen, and she asks, have you got a plan in place for actioning one rule set? So I think recently there was an interview with Patrick Nally, and he said what most sports have like one rule set that they all play off.
So there is. We had started, I think, 2 summers ago, looking at what we could do for one rule set, and things got derailed with the pandemic, and so we need to pick that up again. But essentially, the plan is to start with the low-hanging fruit, so the easy kinds of things that we could do with one. So if you look at the cloth game and if you look at the foam game, they are far more similar than they are different. Okay, so balls aside for the time being. The first step would be, well, because then I'll talk about the balls in a second, but the first step would be, say, the standardization of court size, right? So the court sizes aren't that different. So being able to kind of get the court size standardized is the first thing, and that would allow us to kind of have multi-formats in one venue without having to make big changes. So that's one. Second would be some of the smaller rules. What constitutes a block versus a hit? The kind of like in-flight hits, whether they stay or they go. The way that balls are returned to play are a little bit different in cloth than in foam. I actually really like the way cloth does it. So maybe we have a more standardized approach. So it's looking at those kinds of things first. The balls are always a big issue, because in addition to the foam and cloth standard versions, in the United States, rubber is still really big. Like, all the colleges play rubber. The national circuit, elite circuit in the US still plays rubber. And we still have a lot of countries that play one ball that is kind of like a cloth type of ball. It's more like a volleyball, and they play with the person in the middle, and they go back and forth. So there's a lot to consider in terms of that. I don't think it's an easy fix. I think the reality is that no matter what ball we adopted, if we adopted basketballs next year, within a few years, it would just be what people did, and they would be okay with it. But that initial kind of pain point of getting people to say, well, I have to give up foam, or I have to give up cloth, or I have to give up rubber, or whatever, that's going to be a bit of a fight. But the first step in the plan is making sure that if we're going to continue both formats for a little while, that the basic rules, infrastructure, equipment is largely the same, so it makes it easy for organizers to do.
Awesome. Yeah, as a player, that really excites me, sort of hearing you say that. I sort of think exactly the same. I think people are scared to sort of try something new. From personal experience, I've played foam, cloth, rubber, no sting, and at first I'm like, oh man, I much prefer what I'm used to. But the more I get used to it, it's funny, the better my throw gets with one of them, the more I enjoy that version.
Yeah, and it's generally the case for most people, right? Like, I know I've played every format, and there's one format I like the least and one format I like the best, and actually neither of those are traditional cloth or foam. I find when I was a little bit younger and a little bit better, I liked no sting because I liked the way I could grip the ball, and I found it easier to catch. But that was a personal preference, right? I played cloth, and I enjoyed catching cloth, but I really hate throwing with cloth. But again, I've not played that much, and if I played for it with a whole year, maybe I'd develop it and I'd get a bit better, right? And I think that's true for everybody. So at some point, people are just going to have to understand that we are going to have to move to something more standardized. And when we do, there'll be a bit of a pain period for half of the people or whatever, and then we'll move on.
Okay, cool. Just out of interest, this is a question that's come to my head. What do you think would sway that decision at all? Do you think there would be a natural, I don't really know how to say it. Do you think one version of the sport would naturally pick up, or do you think that is a decision we have to make?
Yeah, it'll be no. I think really there's this kind of feeling that the market will decide, like in a sense, right? I mean, people will just prefer one or the other. But in order for people to establish a preference, they need exposure, right? Otherwise, you're just going to stick with what you know.
Yeah,
But beyond that, I think there's a couple of things that'll drive. One will be three things. One will be what we're restricted to and encouraged, because developing the youth stream, improving that is going to be has to be a big focus for national federations. Has to be. And so rubber is kind of difficult, not impossible, but has different challenges when you're working with kids. Foam tends to be the preferred when dealing with kids, but it's not to say that cloth couldn't, and I know is used in a lot of circles too. So that will be kind of one factor. The other factor will be what countries adopt when they come in. What do they have exposure to? So we get a new national federation from Botswana. Well, we have a federation in Botswana, but say a new one in Mozambique would be a new one. What do they have exposure to first? Because whatever they do, they're probably going to adopt.
Yeah.
And then the third is around cost. Right now, the production and shipping of foam balls, the production can be cheap, but the shipping is really not cost effective right now. Cloth and rubber are both more durable; they last longer. So that's going to weigh into the decision. There's also been talks about how like things like cloth or foam react to retaining moisture or germs or that kind of thing in the new world of pandemic. So it's there's a lot of factors. So I don't know that it's going to be any one that decides it, but obviously familiarity and cost are going to be two big ones.
Okay, cool. But the first step is standardizing the rules, and then we can worry about that.
It's standardizing the rules, and the balls come later. One major fight at a time.
Yeah, I feel like that's enough talking about balls. Right. Okay. So next question. So this is about the Olympics. So IOC recognition. So are the WDBF applying for GAISF status, or are you planning a different method?
Yeah, so we have applied for that. So GAIS is the General Association of International Sports Federations, and they are the gatekeepers of who is in charge of a sport, right? So it's that group that decides that FIFA is the group for soccer and FIBA is the group for basketball. The IOC is the next step up, so you kind of have to do one before you do the other. You can go straight to the IOC, but that's almost impossible feat. So you go through GAIS first. We did apply. So it's a complex situation right now. In 2017, the WDA was given observer status. Observer status is basically like waiting in the lobby. Like you're not a member, but you're allowed to kind of attend meetings and sit and listen. And it's seen as kind of an incubator for new sports to kind of grow. Once they have observer status. So when they got observer status, we were very small. We maybe had 7 or 8 members, like I said, back in 2017. A couple of big things happened. We had an explosive growth in Africa in 2018. And in 2019, the European Dodgeball Federation left the WDA to come to us. We submitted our application to GAIS as well. That was received. We signaled our intent to do that in 2019 and provided them with what we needed to provide. In 2019, they renewed observer status for WDA on the condition that WDA and WDBF would work together to find a solution to governance. That solution is due at the end of September of this year. Okay. We continue to have conversations, but I don't think we'll have a solution by that point in time, because there's just a lot of complexities in the discussions.
I can imagine, yeah.
And so now what they do with that, I don't know. There's basically 3 options. GAIS can renew the WDA status. They can grant us the status. They can remove the status completely and just say, well, come back to us when you're better organized. So that's probably the 3 choices. It could be that they postpone the decision, and that's, I guess, a 4th choice. But those are the 3 most likely choices. So long story, slightly shorter. We have applied for that. Our application's been with them for a year. We have received direction from them to deal with the issue of singular governance, but that is a very complex and challenging issue right now for us.
Yeah. Well, it's good to know also from a player's perspective that I think a lot of people would agree with me that the Olympics is kind of the ultimate goal.
Yes, for sure. Yeah.
So it's really good to know that there are sort of cogs turning and there's processes in motion, which is good.
Yeah, there absolutely are. And then all these other events that we're trying to do, the smaller ones like Tepisa and whatnot, they're all kind of to demonstrate to the IOC that the sport is viable, that it's supported internationally, and that it can be a part of a multi-tournament format. So every time we do one of these smaller tournaments, it's ammunition for us to go back and say the sport is viable and it belongs.
Okay. Yeah, wicked. Sounds great. Cool. Sorry, that question was by Bevers, Alex Bembridge. I didn't say that at the start. Next question. This is from Edinburgh Dodgeball. So they want to know, what's the reasoning for not allowing the home nations to compete at world level?
Sure. So that's a bit of a complicated one. So when we first started engaging Europe back in 2019, obviously in the European Dodgeball Federation, the home nations are there. They compete at that level. When we started looking at the international piece, we were in discussion with British Dodgeball about what that should look like. Now, our understanding of the situation at the time, which I believe still holds true, is that all the members of that play in the home nations are members of British Dodgeball, unless that's changed. But my understanding is that is the setup, so that those players and clubs are members of British Dodgeball, and therefore the representation at the international level should come from British Dodgeball. That was the reason for that. And again, this was a discussion that was had between us and British Dodgeball. It wasn't unilateral. The other position was that as we work through the GAISA process, the process we just talked about, one of the directions that we have from them is to create one-to-one relationships between the national federations and their Olympic committees. So again, I know in Scotland, in similar situations, a drive to have their own Olympic committees. And when that happens, then obviously things change. Now, in Scotland, as an example, should there be a Scottish, if things were to change, if there was a difference in the membership structure going forward, or there was some change in the relationship between dodgeball in Scotland to their national sporting committee, or the emergence of a Scottish Olympic committee, then that would change things as well. But other countries might find themselves going the other way. We look at, our relationship with Hong Kong Dodgeball Association. They're very strong. If something were to change there politically with respect to China, then that could impact the way that they're represented internationally. So we tend to follow the Olympic rules, as you said. That's kind of the ultimate goal. So that we tend to follow those rules, whereby you look at FIFA, and Scotland and Wales and Northern Ireland can still compete at that level, but when it comes to the Olympic Games, they have to, come under the banner of the UK. So it's a similar thing here.
Yep, cool. That's fully understandable from where I'm sitting. Cool. And the final question, I'm not sure this is entirely dodgeball related, but Kirby asks, do you have any tips? Do you have any tips for growing a full-on beard?
You know what? I don't know if I'm actually more open to tips. I think I'm a little patchy and a little disheveled, and I think I can think of about 10 people in dodgeball that should be handing out the tips. For Kirby specifically, I don't think I have anything for Kirby. I think that might be a challenge. That's a challenge, but yeah, I appreciate the question, but yeah, I'm open to other tips if people have them, to be honest.
I think Kirby just shaved his head, didn't he? So maybe he could stick some of that hair.
Oh, there you go. There you go. Improvise.
Cool. Right, I think we'll wrap it up there. Thanks very much, Duane. I personally really enjoyed all of them answers. Thanks for taking the time to sort of speak to House of Dodge today. Is there anything you'd like to say before we wrap up?
No, thanks a lot for having me. I appreciate it, and I love doing these kinds of things. I guess I would just say to the community at large, The sports made a lot of good gains. It's tough. The pandemic kind of made things a lot tougher for all sports, but for sports like ours that are still emerging, still developing, it's been a rough go. So, we have our annual Congress coming up in mid-July. We're going to have some very positive announcements about the World Championships going forward. There's good coming. But like I said, it's tough to sustain the sport solely on volunteers. So to the people listening and to the players, like, please do try to support your local national federations or clubs as best you can in any way you can, because we can weather this storm, but we have a lot of work to do in the next couple of years.
Yeah, I think exciting times ahead.
Yeah, sure.
Wicked. Cool. Thanks again. And we shall close it there. Thank you. Bye.
Okay. Thank you.